He will describe in a couple of words what is Enternext.
Enternext is a new initiative launched 1 year ago by Euronext, and Enternext is a subsidiary of Euronext dedicated to SMEs, meaning companies with a market cap up to 1 billion euros.
Okay.
And our mission is to promote the markets towards investors, but also towards companies, and I would say in all countries in Europe, not only, of course, in France. So, good afternoon, Mary. Thank you to welcome me. We have thought that to make this panel more interactive, we have prepared some statements about the IPO market in Europe, but also in the States. And we would like your feedback answering by true or false. And Mary, you will, if you agree, you will answer these questions.
I'm the guinea pig.
Through these statements, our objective is to touch upon key topics you have to consider when you are planning or thinking about an IPO. First statement is one of the strongest start of the year ever for the European IPO market.
That is true.
Yeah, it's true. Just a number, 70 IPOs on European exchanges this year to date, so similar to the pre-crisis levels.
Do you have the same number in the US?
Not far from this, but if you are talking about money raised, for instance, since the beginning of the year, the amount raised in Europe is higher than in the States for IPOs. So it's quite new. I would say this trend is quite new, but quite encouraging. Second statement, limited capital available in Europe.
Limited capital available. So in relative to the US, yes.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Yeah.
Then is it sufficient for the needs? Maybe true.
Yeah, relative to the US, you're right, because if we look at the asset management industry, US represents around 50% and Europe 31%. But I can tell you that there is lots of capital to invest and available in Europe for SMEs. Next statement, European investors are hungry for new equity stories.
That is true. That we saw. However, they do not understand them so well.
Yeah, you're right, and it's true definitively. And if we look just at the, I would say the success of the IPOs on our markets, IPOs on Euronext market are covered more than 3 times this year, thanks to appetite from investors, both European investors, but also institutional one. Very important to notice that through these IPOs, a lot of non-European investors are coming and investing through and in these IPOs of European companies. Other statement.
Do you have a percentage, average percentage of the part
what we can say is, globally speaking, for IPO placement, the part of institutional, not domestic,
right?
I would say between 30 and 50%, depending on the deal.
Right.
So meaning both European and non-European. And after that, it will definitely depend on the sector and on the company, especially if we are talking about, for instance, life science. US investors are very present in the life science deals. And for other sectors, they could be less present, but we also have some, I would say, new investors or new countries since 20 years. For instance, Scandinavia has been very active in some IPOs this year, which is quite new in the market.
So these are French numbers, or do you see the same thing happening in other exchanges?
It's the same thing in other exchanges, but we are talking today about our market, meaning France, Netherlands, Belgium, and Portugal. But if we look, for instance, at other European markets, we can witness the same trend.
Okay.
Other statement, I need to be listed in the US to access US investors.
Well, if you look at the CAC 40, which
which is not in my scope, but why not?
But why not? You can see that there is some US money in France at least, and I believe in Europe as well. So I believe it might not be true, but it might be easier if you go listed in the US to get US money.
It's not exactly true because, of course, if you are listed in the US, you are supposed to have much more US investors in your capital. Quite clear. But as I mentioned, for instance, on life science sectors, there are a lot of US investors in French or European companies. And also very interesting to know and to notice that thanks to the Jobs Act and some of the new regulations, some non-US companies could have access to US investors through private placement very easily or much more easily compared to previous years. And some of our French company, for instance, I think about DBV Technology or Nanobiotics, have realized some private placement only to US investors, and these companies are not listed in the States. So it's quite new thanks to the Jobs Act. Tech companies are comfortable going public in Europe.
False.
It depends. I will answer, but yeah, just to mention 10 IPOs for tech companies since the beginning of this year, and 1.7 billion raised for these companies. So
it's getting better.
It's getting better, exactly. The road is long. The game is not over, but we are quite confident that these figures could increase in the next coming months and years. Another, for me, very interesting one, because we are reading a lot of things in the newspaper, for instance. European tech companies preferably go public in the States.
So European tech companies, I would say it depends on which sector, meaning where your peers are.
Yeah.
And if you don't have any peers, you'd rather go to the US because these are where your peers are. So I would say it depends on the sector. But usually, if they are not, yes, they're more comfortable going to the US.
Okay, but in reality, if we look at the figures, less than one per year on average on the last 10 years. So for the time being, 7 European tech companies went public in the States during the last 10 years. And of course, in these companies, you will find Criteo, of course, and you know about it, but it's only 7 companies. So we have just to, and it is exactly what you've said, it depends on the company, probably on the sector, on the market, but also on the size of the company, and I will say also on the side of needs in terms of new money, because it could be very difficult to imagine a US listing to raise 10 million euro, and not every tech company has needs above 200 million euros or 300 million euros to finance its growth. So we have to be very careful and be careful with what we heard or read. 7 companies during the last 10 years only in the States, and 1 in Hong Kong to be, but it is not a technology till L'Occitane.
And on the tech companies that went public in Europe?
Yeah.
So which sector were they more coming from?
What we are seeing for the time being, I would say since 2 or 3 years, a new trend with some numeric and digital companies thinking and coming. A very good example 1 month ago with AWOX, Internet of Things, with a good IPO, a very successful one. They raised 25 million euros. The demand exceeded 120 million euros. Anivia, 2 weeks ago, video player, I would say very technical and very innovative company. And in the pipe, we have other companies with high level of innovation on pure technology, either on web services, I would say, coming on the market in the next days. So for us, it's very encouraging. As I mentioned, we have a lot of things to do and to implement. And I would just mention maybe an initiative we have announced last week. We have signed a partnership with Morningstar. Morningstar is an equity research provider. And we have signed an agreement. They will publish and distribute before summer equity research report for all our 220 TMT companies listed in our markets. So it is quite new, because if we look at the 220 companies, 40% of them are not covered at all by any analyst. And if we consolidate those with no analyst at all and those with